You know that moment. You're on a bus, a train, or sitting in a waiting room, and there's that one empty seat right next to someone, a stranger, and you feel it immediately. That subtle panic, that internal calculation. Is it worth sitting there? Will they think you're weird? Will you accidentally touch shoulders? Will the awkwardness be unbearable? Yeah, that overwhelming urge to find literally any other seat, even if it means standing or sitting farther away, even if it makes no practical sense. You're not alone in this. In fact, most people experience this exact moment, and what happens next says something profound about how human psychology works. Today, we're breaking down the science of why so many of us would rather contort ourselves into uncomfortable positions than sit next to a stranger. And spoiler alert, it's not about being unfriendly or antisocial, it's about something far deeper. Here's the thing. Our personal space isn't just a physical boundary, it's a psychological one. Psychologists call it proxemics, and it's the study of how humans use space and distance in social interactions. And this isn't arbitrary. This is hardwired into our nervous system. Anthropologist Edward Hall identified 4 distance zones that humans instinctively maintain. There's intimate distance, from 0 to 18 inches, which is reserved for people we trust deeply. Then there's personal distance, from 18 inches to 4 feet, where we stand with friends and acquaintances. Then comes social distance, 4 to 12 feet, where we interact with people we don't know well. And finally, public distance, anything beyond 12 feet, where we might observe strangers from afar. When someone sits directly next to you, they're entering your personal space without permission, and your nervous system registers this as a threat, even if your conscious mind knows they're completely harmless. This isn't paranoia. This is biology. Your amygdala, the part of your brain that processes fear and threat detection, starts working overtime. Your cortisol levels spike. You become hyper-aware of every movement they make, every breath they take, whether they're too hot or too cold, or taking up too much armrest space. It's exhausting. But here's what makes this even more interesting. It's not just about the physical proximity. It's about the unpredictability. Strangers are walking question marks. You don't know what they'll do or say. They don't know the social rules that govern your life. Will they start a conversation you don't want to have? Will they make eye contact? Will they eat something that smells like a dumpster fire? With people you know, you have mental models. You know how they operate. You can predict their behavior. But a stranger? They're a variable you can't control. And humans hate that. We're prediction machines. Our brains are constantly trying to anticipate what's going to happen next. And when we can't do that, we experience what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. That uncomfortable feeling when reality doesn't match your expectations. Sitting next to a stranger is like trying to watch a movie where you can't predict what happens next, and the movie is happening inches away from your face, and you can't pause it or change the channel. This is where something called the mere exposure effect comes into play, but in reverse. The mere exposure effect says that familiarity breeds liking. The more you see someone, the more you like them. But when you're sitting next to a complete stranger, you're getting exposure without the benefit of accumulated familiarity. You're just getting the discomfort. And your brain is essentially saying, I don't know this person, and I'm trapped here, and they're too close. That's a recipe for anxiety. There's also a phenomenon researchers call social monitoring. When we're around strangers, we engage in this unconscious surveillance. We scan their behavior for social threats. Are they looking at us? Are they positioned in a way that suggests aggression? Are they making unusual movements? This constant vigilance is mentally taxing. It's why some people feel completely exhausted after spending time in crowded places or sitting near strangers, even if nothing bad happened. Your nervous system has been in a low-grade state of alert the entire time. Now, here's something crucial. This isn't equally distributed across all people. Some people experience this far more intensely than others. People with social anxiety disorder, for instance, experience heightened threat detection in social situations. Their amygdala is basically on overdrive. Sitting next to a stranger isn't just uncomfortable for them. It can trigger genuine panic responses. They might experience racing heart, sweating, difficulty breathing, all the symptoms of anxiety, just from the proximity to someone they don't know. For them, avoidance isn't a preference. It's a survival mechanism. But even people without anxiety disorders experience this to some degree. It's part of being human. And then, there's something called the spotlight effect, which makes this worse. The spotlight effect is our tendency to overestimate how much other people notice us. You think that stranger is judging you way more than they actually are. You think they care about where you sit way more than they do. Most strangers are entirely focused on their own thoughts and their own phones. They're not thinking about you at all. But your brain convinced you that they are. Your brain is essentially making you the center of a story that literally nobody else is watching. And let's talk about modern life for a second. We're living in a time where we've become accustomed to controlling our social exposure. You can curate your social media feeds. You can choose who messages you. You can mute conversations. You can exit interactions whenever you want. But sitting next to a stranger on public transportation, that's one of the few remaining situations where you're forced into proximity with someone you didn't choose, for a duration you can't fully control. It's a relic of a more communal past, and our modern brains aren't equipped for it. We've become allergic to randomness. We want predictability, control, and the ability to exit at any moment. Sitting next to a stranger violates all three of those needs. There's also an element of what sociologists call civil inattention. This is the unspoken agreement that when you're near a stranger, you ignore them. You don't make eye contact. You pretend they don't exist. It's a fascinating social choreography. But the thing is, maintaining this requires cognitive effort. You have to actively resist the urge to look at them. You have to position your body in a way that signals, I am not interested in interacting with you. You have to manage the tension between being close to someone and maintaining the fiction that they're not there. It's exhausting, and sometimes the effort required to maintain civil inattention is so draining that people would just rather not sit down at all. But here's where it gets even more complex. There's a cultural dimension to this too. In some cultures, sitting next to a stranger is more acceptable than in others. In many Northern European countries, the concept of personal space is extremely valued. Strangers maintaining distance is the norm. In other parts of the world, close proximity is more accepted. People might sit next to strangers without hesitation. This isn't because one culture is more anxious than another. It's because cultural norms shape what feels normal and comfortable. If you're raised in a culture that values personal space, sitting next to a stranger will feel wrong. If you're raised in a culture where proximity is normal, it will feel fine. Your nervous system calibrates based on what you've learned is safe. And then there's the gender dimension. Studies show that women are often more likely to report discomfort sitting next to strangers than men, particularly male strangers. This isn't because women are more anxious in a general sense. It's because women have been socialized to perceive potential threats differently. They're taught to be vigilant about stranger danger, to monitor for potential aggression, to stay alert. Sitting next to a male stranger is loaded with additional layers of concern that men don't typically experience. Is he going to be respectful of my space? Is he going to make this weird? Is he going to do something inappropriate? For many women, avoiding sitting next to strangers isn't anxiety. It's pattern recognition based on lived experience. There's also what psychologists call the illusion of transparency, which ties into this. We tend to assume that other people can read our minds better than they actually can. You think that the stranger sitting next to you can sense your discomfort. You think they know you don't want to sit there. You think your displeasure is written all over your face. But most strangers have no idea. They're oblivious to your internal experience. But your brain is convinced they're not. Your brain is telling you that your discomfort is visible, that they're noticing it, that they might be judging you for it, when in reality they're probably just checking their phone and thinking about what they're going to eat for lunch. Now, here's the really interesting part. Some people don't experience this at all, or they experience it minimally. These are often people with high extroversion, people who score low on neuroticism, people who have had positive experiences with strangers, or people who have been trained or forced to tolerate proximity to strangers regularly. People who take the bus every single day might eventually become desensitized to it. Their amygdala stops firing as aggressively because they've learned through repeated exposure that nothing bad happens. Flight attendants, nurses, doctors, other professionals who interact with strangers in close proximity all day, they often don't experience the discomfort because their brains have been recalibrated by experience. But for many people, avoidance reinforces the pattern. If you always avoid sitting next to strangers, your brain never gets the chance to learn that it's safe. Your avoidance behavior confirms to your amygdala that there was indeed a threat, even though there wasn't. There's also something called the bystander effect that's related to this. When you're sitting next to a stranger, you're not in a group. You're one-on-one with someone you don't know. This makes you feel more responsible for managing the interaction. If you were in a group, you could distribute the social responsibility, but alone, next to a stranger, you feel like all the responsibility falls on you. You feel like you have to maintain conversation, or prevent awkwardness, or manage the dynamic, but you don't. Most strangers sitting next to each other don't interact at all, but your brain doesn't trust that. Your brain thinks interaction is likely, and it's preparing you for something that probably won't happen. And then there's the concept of belonging uncertainty. Human beings have a fundamental need to belong, to feel accepted, and strangers represent a threat to that. They're not part of your in-group. They don't know you. They don't know your values, your interests, your personality. They're coming in with no frame of reference except your physical appearance and your demeanor in that moment. There's a part of you that worries that they'll judge you, that they'll find you lacking, that they'll think you're weird or boring or unattractive. And sitting next to them amplifies that worry because you're so close, because every slight movement or expression could be interpreted, because the stakes feel higher. You want to belong, but this stranger is a wild card. They might like you, or they might think you're terrible, and that uncertainty is uncomfortable. Now, some people avoid sitting next to strangers for a darker reason. Some people have experienced harassment or assault in public spaces. They've had strangers invade their space in ways that were threatening or traumatic. For them, avoidance isn't just a preference. It's a protective response. It's their nervous system saying, "The last time we trusted a stranger to be near us, bad things happened. Let's not do that again." And for them, the discomfort of sitting next to a stranger is actually a rational response to a genuine pattern of threat in their life. And that's important to acknowledge. There's a difference between ordinary social discomfort and trauma-informed avoidance. One is processing anxiety. The other is protecting yourself from harm. But for most people, most of the time, sitting next to a stranger is just uncomfortable, not dangerous. It triggers stress responses that are evolutionarily ancient, but socially outdated. We're reacting like this stranger might attack us, when really they're just trying to get to the next stop on the bus. We're treating proximity as threat, when really it's just proximity. And the fact that we do this, the fact that something so innocuous triggers such a strong response, says something about how sensitive our threat detection systems are. Here's something wild. Studies on personal space and proximity show that when people are forced to sit next to strangers, they often engage in what's called compensatory behavior. They angle their body away, they cross their arms, they make themselves smaller. They avoid eye contact even more intensely. They pull out their phones and get hyper-focused on them. They create a psychological distance to compensate for the physical proximity they can't escape. It's like they're saying, "My body might be here, but my mind is somewhere else. I am not available for interaction." And it's fascinating how much energy goes into sending that signal. And let's be honest, there's an element of class and safety perception here too. The stranger sitting next to you might be wearing expensive clothes or cheap clothes, might look like they belong to your social group or outside it. And that changes how you perceive the threat. We make snap judgments about strangers based on appearance, and those judgments influence how comfortable we feel sitting next to them. It's not always fair, and it's often unconscious, but it's real. We've internalized social hierarchies, and they influence how we navigate physical space. But here's what's important to know. If you're someone who feels that surge of discomfort when you see an empty seat next to a stranger, and you have that instinct to keep walking, to stand instead, to take a seat across the car, you're not broken. You're not antisocial. You're just experiencing a normal human response to proximity with the unknown. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's monitoring for threats. It's maintaining boundaries. It's keeping you safe, even if the threat it's protecting you from is purely imaginary. And that's okay. But here's the thing. If you recognize this pattern and you want to change it, you can. Through repeated exposure, through conscious effort to challenge the assumptions your brain is making about threat, you can recalibrate your nervous system. You can sit next to strangers without that immediate spike of anxiety. It won't happen overnight, but it can happen. The brain is plastic. It changes with experience, and sitting next to a stranger isn't going to hurt you, even though your nervous system is convinced it might. So, if you find yourself doing that internal calculation every time you see an empty seat next to a stranger, if you feel that tension, that slight panic, that urge to find another option, you're normal. You're responding to something deeply ingrained in human psychology, something ancient. Something that once kept our ancestors alive by detecting genuine threats in the distance. Something that allowed them to survive in a world where strangers actually could be dangerous. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it evolved to do. It's protecting you. It's keeping you vigilant. It's saying, I don't know this person, and that means I need to be careful. And for thousands of years, that was wisdom. That was survival. But you also have the option to sit down anyway. And this is important. This isn't about forcing yourself to be comfortable. This isn't about ignoring your nervous system or pretending it doesn't matter. It's about something different entirely. It's about understanding that you have a choice. You can feel the discomfort and choose to sit anyway. You can feel the panic and choose to stay, because that's where change actually happens. Not in the absence of fear, but in the presence of it, when you decide to act anyway. The first time you do this, it will be hard. You'll sit down, and your heart will race, and you'll be hyper-aware of every breath, every movement, every moment. You'll be convinced that something bad is about to happen, and then nothing happens. You sit there. The bus moves. Maybe the person next to you gets off at the next stop. Maybe they stay for 10 stops, but nothing bad happens. And that's the most important thing your nervous system can learn. Not that strangers are good, or that proximity is comfortable, but that it's survivable, that you can handle it. And then you can do it again next time, and the time after that. And slowly, something shifts. Not overnight, but over weeks and months, your amygdala starts to recalibrate. Your cortisol response becomes less dramatic. The tension doesn't spike as high. The panic doesn't last as long. Your body learns through repetition what your mind intellectually understands, that the threat isn't real, that you're safe. This is called exposure therapy, and it's one of the most effective treatments we have for anxiety-related disorders. And you don't need a therapist to do it. You can do it yourself. You can be your own therapist. You can sit next to that stranger and say to yourself, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing to feel uncomfortable because I want to grow. I want to stop letting fear dictate my choices. I want to reclaim a small piece of my autonomy. Because every time you avoid something, you're giving your fear a vote. You're saying, fear, you're right. This is dangerous. Let's avoid it. And your fear wins. And it grows. And the next time, the threat feels even bigger. But every time you face something and survive it, you're giving courage a vote. You're saying, I'm scared, but I'm doing this anyway. And courage grows. Sometimes the most meaningful thing you can do is lean into discomfort. Not recklessly, but consciously. To recognize that the fear isn't coming from the situation itself, but from the story your mind is telling about it. Sitting next to a stranger isn't a threat. It's just two people sharing space for a few minutes. No one is watching. No one is judging. Everyone is wrapped up in their own thoughts, just trying to get through the day. Choosing to sit down doesn't change your life overnight, but it changes something inside you. It proves that anxiety isn't in complete control. That you can feel fear and still act. And that small, ordinary act begins to rewrite the story you tell yourself about what you're capable of. Because if you can move through this moment of discomfort, maybe you can move through others too. And maybe it all starts with something as simple as an empty seat next to a stranger.